All right, everyone, let's start our second afternoon session. And it is my delight to introduce Lance Smith, who we have been meeting on occasion throughout the day. And Dr. Lance Smith is professor of Mythological Studies at Pacifica. In the 1970s, he traveled with Joseph Campbell in northern France, Egypt, and Kenya. He has taught at colleges and institutes in Switzerland, Italy, France, Maryland, Texas, and California, and is the recipient of awards for distinguished teaching from Midwestern State University in Texas and the Pacifica Graduate Institute. His PhD is from the Claremont Graduate School, and he has an MA in creative writing from Antioch International and a BA from Williams College. He is the author of 3 books of poems, 2 novels, plus 10 books, and numerous articles on comparative literature and mythology. He has given presentations for the C.G. Jung Institutes in Kusnacht and New York City, the Seattle Friends of Jung, the Modern Language Association, the American Association for the Study of Popular Culture, the Study of Myth Conference at Pacifica Graduate Institute, the Ojai Writers Conference, and the Casa dei Picchi at Cercio San Felice in Italy. I may be mispronouncing that. His edited volume of Joseph Campbell's writings and lectures on the Grail romances was published in 2015, and his edition of the Selected Correspondence of Joseph Campbell in 2019. Please welcome Lance.
I wish I could do a little Indian dance here. You know, I remember Joseph Campbell speaking about that in India, saying if something hasn't happened for at least 5 hours, it hasn't happened at all. And that was about Indian dance, but I promised not to go for 5 hours. So my title, I should say something briefly about, before I switch to my page of patriarchs plus the one beautiful matriarch in the system. My interest is in the mythology of the descent to and return from the underworld in literary modernism and painting and film. Following T.S. Eliot's definition of the mythical method, it's a sustained parallel between the present and the past based on an underlying network of symbolism associated with myth. And over the years in my approach to that material, I combined the Greek word related to the descent to the underworld, nekia, with the word archetype for a coinage, necrotype. And that simply refers to archetypal images of a universal distribution associated with variations of that particular myth of the descent to the underworld in a variety of different media. And then over the years, the last few years actually, I began to recognize that the goddess was the one in charge of the whole show. I mean, I knew that for a long time, but of particular importance for the iconographies associated with those mythologies. So I modified the term here, Necro-Gynetypes. I know it's an awkward phrase, and I would welcome a more felicitous kind of way of saying it. But basically, I'm referring to archetypal images of the divine feminine that are connected to the myth of the descent to the underworld. To explore. And since my basic roots are in modernist literature, with Joyce and Mann and Virginia Woolf and H.D. and Mina Loy and any number of other fascinating, particularly since the Second World War, the emergence of very powerful women writing, Krista Wolf, A.S. Byatt, and others as well, who have adapted the old mythologies, done something really quite extraordinary with them. Krista Wolf particularly, with her Medea and Cassandra. So I have on the screen here a very well-known painting by Gustav Klimt of Adele Bloch, which was the subject of an important movie about the Nazi theft of European art, particularly those of the Jewish provenance. And it all of a sudden occurred to me when we went on one occasion to the Neue Gallery in New York and saw this image. And on the surface of it, a kind of immediate sense of fin de siècle, belle époque, a vision of the feminine in a very particular kind of social construct in Vienna, associated with the roles played by women. And from that perspective, I was not interested, greatly interested. So then I started to explore the iconography of her dress and began to recognize, as we'll see during the presentation, an extraordinary range of traditional archetypal imagery of the sort that we've been seeing all morning. That's for whatever reason and to whatever degree of consciousness, Gustav Klimt worked into this particular portrait. So for my thinking of, being a modernist, it has that parallel relationship between the present and the past, activating these really gorgeous images. My work in my dissertation and my books has frequently engaged with the imagery of the great goddess traditions. And these, in my day, when I was a graduate student in Claremont from 79 to 86, these were the men, that really charged my imagination in relationship to the work. But it wasn't until more recently when I was introduced to Maria through Joseph Campbell and began to be completely mesmerized by the iconography and the imagery in that book, and to see it in a new and interesting way. So that's the tradition that I've come out of. And I would have to add my mentor, Joseph Campbell, who, when I first started thinking about this conference, remembering the rather remarkable week that Steve had put together, Maureen was there, and what an education in the iconographies of the goddess, as you can see by the menu on the side. And it was a while back. What's this say up there? 83, 84. And the picture of him is just after we went into a creek in Kenya to have a boxed lunch. And a capuchin monkey has just stolen my banana right out of my box. And boy, did he get a kick out of that. And I don't know how I managed to have the wits to take the picture. But, I opened the box, the banana was there, the capuchin monkey was on the railing. He jumped onto the table and he came up to me and I don't know if you've ever seen the teeth of a monkey like that. So my obvious reaction, step back, and he snatches the banana. It was a wonderful moment. And I owe a great deal in every way to the mentoring of this wonderful man. Now, this is a very quick sort of overture to the various archetypal images that I'm calling Necro-Gynetypes, and I put it in this form to very briefly indicate the range of imagery from different kinds of sources that emerge when one studies the iconographies of the goddess. And they include, in very, very interesting ways, geometrical symbols, like the ones that were mentioned in the dream of the downward pointed triangle. Okay. So traditionally, a downward pointed triangle is a feminine, related to incarnation, and the upward pointed triangle traditionally associated with the masculine and what we might call disincarnation or transfiguration. In other words, life and death. And she presides over the whole show, the whole heroine's journey of the soul. So this is the kind of imagery that I want to explore in this the iconography of the woman in gold. And you're already familiar with several of these images illustrating the iconography of the goddess. There are several that are not in Klimt's paintings that we're going to focus on. I'm particularly fond of the lioness and the connection between the goddess and the big cats over a long period of time. And this is one of the subjects of Campbell's little article on the great goddess in Parabola back some time ago. So just occurred to me that this might be one of the display postures, Monica, you were talking about, in a way, from Chateaubriand, from 6,500 BC or so, of the goddess giving birth, and she's holding lions in each hand, and a very vivid representation of the power of women when they're giving birth. You can really feel what would it be like to hold those two lions and be in their grip during the birthing process. And I'm sorry, I seem to be touching this the wrong way. And then, of course, the wonderful imagery of Sekhmet in Egypt and the iconographies on the coast of Asia Minor associated with goddesses like Artemis and Diana. And there again in the Greek world, with those two lions in her grip. And that would give us, 7,000 years of a tradition associating the goddess with the lion. And particularly interested in the Campbell domain was the story he would always tell. In these cultures, the sun was feminine, and her animal was the lioness. And she, on a monthly basis, pounces on the lunar bull, devours the bull, and the bull is then reborn from her womb. So you get these quite fascinating, very old images of the eagle or the bird or the lion pouncing on the moon, and that dynamic of death and rebirth in her iconography. Snakes and dragons, of course, going back farther from Genesis with the negative associations of Eve, the tree, the serpent, and the fruit, which was what I was brought up with until I read Campbell's book, Occidental Mythology, in the first volume, where he talks about what he calls the serpent's bride. And all of a sudden, this imagery goes way back, and it opens up to an entirely, basically Mesopotamian kind of range of images in which there isn't any trace whatsoever of the patriarchal denigration of the goddess or the snake or the fruit, where she is spontaneously distributing the fruits of the knowledge of immortality at the tree of life. And boy, did I need that message after all those years as an Episcopalian boy, singing in the choir. And I, of course, had rejected all of that by the time I got to college, but he enabled me to reconnect with those images in a way that meant a great deal to me. So here are a couple of more examples of this fascinating iconography, connecting the goddess to the snake. And most often in this tradition, connecting both to healing. So what you'll see is Hygeia, a little Latin plaque there on our right, with the serpent and the cup, and her connection. I'm sorry, what is this? Keep doing that. Her connection to the rituals of healing and medicine. And then, curiously enough, a couple thousand years later, we have Gustav Klimt's illustrations for the ceiling at the university in Zurich. When you go, Vienna. When you go to Vienna, go to the university. And then on the ceiling are these spectacular images that Klimt did, but they didn't fully survive. So you don't see the whole set of images. And this, therefore, is a kind of additional artifact that Gustav Klimt created for the role of medicine in the curriculum at the University of Vienna. and a couple more images connecting this mythology. What you'll see there on the left is actually from another location in Vienna, the Secession building. And it's a fascinating and famous sort of version of the kiss. But I got quite interested in what's happening above their heads with what looks to me like a fiery sort of halo of snakes coming up above the heads of the lovers as they kiss. And one of the images I think that Hallie showed of the Take Back the Night one has this really interesting stuff going on above the head. And I don't know what to make of it. It's just beautiful. And the only association I had with the serpents coming up from the head was the ball court at Chichen Itza, where you'll see the serpents are erupting from the decapitated body of the loser. And they are erupting in the form of snakes, and then from the snakes come squash blossoms, you see? And it's that whole sort of interesting agricultural phenomenon of this imagery of the dismemberment of the god or the goddess, whose body then provides the food for the community in that iconography. Now, so to start to look a little bit more carefully at the images from Gustav Klimt, you'll see at the top of the screen ornithological and ocular necrotypes. Because the ocular necrotype is extremely old. It goes back to Inanna, when she's hung up on the peg, and I do think it's a crucifixion. She's killed by the eye of wrath of her sister, Ereshkigal. And you can track that connection between the goddess and the archetypal feminine and the image of the eyes, all the way up to Thomas Pynchon's Crying of Lot 49, if anybody's read that book, in which there's an extraordinary section devoted to a bar near the nautical facilities in Pasadena, where there is a striptease dance. And so it connects then to the divestiture of Inanna and then the haunting eyes in the scene. And for better or for worse, Pynchon is one of our great postmodern novelists and very profoundly connected to the imagery of kind of the darker side, I would say, of the feminine. So here are a couple of images of associating the ocular symbolism and the great goddess traditions, but you can already see that sort of geographical hieroglyph, beginning to emerge. The chevrons, I think, that Maria Gimbutas referred to them in that particular pattern. The ornithological aspect is not immediately and rather difficult to see. And I wonder if anybody can show me where it is in Gustav Klimt's image. And maybe, upper left. Upper left, you'll see what looks like the eyes of an L. And they are in between a very important geometrical symbol, which of course is the upward pointed pyramid in the imagery. So that began to make me more interested in Madame Adele Bloch in the Belle Epoque era, before and certainly after World War I. So the ornithological connection with the imagery of the birds is quite a beautiful tradition, and you've seen many of these today. So I won't dwell on them. The Egyptian goddess Mut, the goddess of death and rebirth, and the Egyptian goddesses in the form of a bird, and then one of my favorite Mary Hebner images of the goddess in that posture. And directly above it is one of the most extraordinary sights that I was basically introduced to by Campbell in his historical atlas of world mythology. It's a little ivory figurine of a wild gander, the wild goose, found in association with the burial of a child and iconographies in the cave associated with the goddess. It's a very touching kind of place at Malta, eastern Siberia on the lake. So this particular image is combines several of these images associated with the great goddess, traditions, the ocular, astronomical, architectural, and geometric. The top image is one of the cylinder seals from Mesopotamia, rolled out in wet clay, associated with the myth of the descent of Inanna. And it has some of the basic motifs that are there in that story. And they include, of course, the ocular symbolism on the left. And they include, very importantly, the doorpost and the threshold imagery, architectural. And that doorpost, I've been told, basically migrates from the Middle East and Mesopotamia into the Minoan Mycenaean territory, where, for example, at the Palace of Mycenae, you'll see the famous Lion Gate. And there's two lions on either side of a pillar. And the notion is that it connects the Greek mainland with Minoan Crete, with the centrality of the imagery of the goddess, because inside there is the famous Pylos tomb, a tomb in the form of the beehive, with the famous gold mask that was found there, so-called Mask of Agamemnon. So that ocular motif is obviously present and important, but so also is that rosette. And I think you were counting the petals on the rosette, Maureen?
I was counting the gates.
Oh, the number of triangles above the door. Yeah.
Either side. So I was thinking of the center down to the end.
Nice. Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah. And then the association with the rosette is with the planet Venus and the cycles of the planet Venus, in particular numerical cycles, 8, and I think they're basically multiples of 8. And they are related to the famous royal cemetery of Ur, with the huge burial sites where the whole court went down with the king. And all of those rituals of death and rebirth and the cycles in the Mesopotamian world associated with those of the myth of Inanna. So that myth is to those stories as our Mary and Jesus are, to the rituals in a church. The interesting connection here on the bottom is one of the many sites scattered around the Mediterranean world that have temples and tombs associated with the Neolithic goddess traditions. And they often have the spiral, and the spirals get connected to the ocular business. And the spirals have a particular direction and a particular meaning that Ananda K. Kumaraswamy wrote about quite beautifully. Basically, aspects of incarnation and disincarnation, depending on the direction of the spiral. So the spirals are all over this painting and very strategically situated on both sides of her face. And they very, very close to the traditional Celtic triple spirals of the phases of the goddess's life, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And so you'll see in the upper right there, one of the stones inside of Newgrange. Once you go through the entrance where there's a famous stone with large, impressive spirals in the Celtic form, interlaced like this. When you go down that long tomb passageway, you go by this extraordinary stone, with a triple spiral there. And of course, Newgrange as an earth mound, in that culture, very much associated with the dynamics of the goddess and with the dynamic of death and rebirth, because as you know, on the solstice, the sun goes directly down this dark corridor, penetrating to the inner chamber, where there's a rather ominous-looking stone bowl, which I remember Campbell talking about going there and say, oh, I know why that's there. It's for the sacrifices, regicides, ritual regicides, where the king would be sacrificed, in certain periods of time associated with the dynamic of death and rebirth under the auspices of the great goddess of the land. Okay? And this Irish guy turned to him and said, hey, I'll put that in my story. So he's probably telling that story now, just as I am. And then this gorgeous cup, with this iconography of the spiral, and also a central Necro-Gynetype of the vessel, the sacred vessel, like the image you showed, Monica, of the egg and the goddess of the egg. And again, what I love about being at Pacifica and what I love about having a wonderful career that will never pay for retirement is the way that contemporary arts engage these images. To what extent they're fully conscious of them is, not easy to know. But this is Escher's very famous image of the interlocking spirals that you can draw on a page without lifting your pen up off the page. And it's obviously connected to the fish emerging and submerging with the different colors. So it brings into the mix what I like to call the night sea journey necrotype, the journey through the dark associated with death and rebirth. A more contemporary example than Escher is this spectacular mural down in L.A. At the Broad Museum. I think it's on the second floor, where there's the whole room is full of these Murakami images from Japan, incorporating the iconographies of the Japanese traditions. And this one's got a whole bunch of spirals in it. And they're connected to the whirlpool, which is a very important aspect of those iconographies. And the night sea journey, which you can make out in the upper left, is an image of me, seasick, looking over this side into the water and seeing whirlpools. And this is the dream I had that really led to my whole career and life development. It was very similar to that image. And it actually led to my experience with Joseph Campbell when Hallie's sister, Lainey, came down the hall one day and said, you got to read this book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And then she came down the next day with collected works of Jung, portable Jung, and said, you need to read the Devouring Mother archetype chapter. And I didn't know anything about Jung or Campbell. So she was my introduction to this wonderful tradition. So a few more images to track the extent of this megalithic, Neolithic tradition. We saw the spirals from the Mediterranean, most famously is the island of Malta. You can track the spiral geometrical symbolism all up the coast of Brittany, all over the place. Newgrange, famously. And then go just a little bit farther, I can't imagine it, up to the Orkney Islands at the northernmost tip of Scotland. And you see this extraordinary site connected to burial on the little island off the coast, Scarrow Bray. And it clearly connects the iconographies of the goddess with the domain of death and rebirth, and with the tomb at the top. And the tombs, by the way, form a particular architectural structure in that megalithic world. they've often got a sort of clover leaf, with a central sanctum and two smaller sanctums on either side, and a very important part of the architectural aspect of the iconography of the goddess. And then on the outside, I've cropped this image on our right considerably. One of the stones during the excavation has the triangles again, very close to the ones that one sees in that wonderful snake goddess, Lady of the Labyrinth, where her apron, interlocking upward and downward pointed triangles on the apron on her womb, and they form a diamond, of course. So that geometrical symbolism is quite fascinating to me. So just a few more images to add on to the day with these little goddess figurines from the Mesopotamian region on our right. And then that little marvelous little effigy is from Orkney, in the same site where the burials were. And you can barely make out two little eye sockets there. And then on our right, not only the ocular symbolism, but the ornithological symbolism connected to her, and very importantly, the geometrical symbolism, very carefully articulated, particularly the farthest one, which has those upward and downward pointed triangles interlocking to form a diamond, like the ones you'll see on the snake goddess. And then inscribing inside them, you can see a little square as well. And then, of course, the central point, from which all of those forms emerge, like the Rig Veda song, where does it all come from? The central point is the omphalos, the point from which all life emerges. And these are gorgeous little things. There's no sort of literary, foundation for anything that I'm saying. So you have to sort of make it up. I mean, to be honest. But the more, as you all know, as scholars, the more you know about the traditions, the better shape you're in for when you start to talk about what is this all about. So there's some more eye goddesses there at the top, fascinating ones, I believe, from the Oriental Museum in Chicago, which has one of the most important collections of this material. They don't have a catalog, so I just photographed the whole thing on my iPhone. And then I had to go back and reconstruct it. But right below them, you will see a little patch from Adele Bloch, the Gustav Klimt piece. And you'll notice, of course, the geometrical symbolism of the triangles, but you'll also notice something that looks very much like ocular symbolism connected to the goddess, and quite possibly fish eyes, seeing in the dark, seeing in the depths, seeing into the abyss, as a part of her iconography. And I have to confess that I fudged this a little bit to reverse the vertical order on the bottom image, so the triangle is pointed downwards. The kind of thing that art historians like to try to get away with and see if anybody notices. They should be pointed upwards. Don't. So this page explores the range of geometrical figures that Gustav Klimt incorporated into his piece, and they do include a fascinating work with squares and of varying colors and sizes and proportions. In the lower right, I cut and pasted one of those old goddess images with the triangles and the squares and the eyes, and I put it in the middle of one of Joseph Albers' famous homage to the square cycles. And what I think is a lot of the abstract modernist art is very profoundly rooted in a spiritual tradition, and often they are very conscious of it. in extremely interesting ways. So the square is a part of the mix. Now, just to move forward towards the conclusion, leaving the Adele Bloch picture behind in Vienna, we're going to go to Brussels. And there's this a place called the Stocklet Palace. And Klimt did mosaics for it. It's an extraordinary place. And all of the mosaics that he did are rooted in his lifelong fascination with the Egyptian mythology of Isis and Osiris in very, very interesting configurations. And here, of course, you'll see the geometrical symbols. The tree, of course, I haven't mentioned as an arboreal Necro-Gynetype. There's old Egyptian images that you'll see of a child emerging from a tree or a child being nursed by the tree goddess. And then, of course, the very important bird in this case is the falcon associated with Horus, who puts the dismembered pieces of Osiris back together the way you all as therapists do on a daily basis. And a variation on the kiss on the right. So, in an inner room of the Stocklet Palace, which you'll see there in the center, that's the building, right? Which is quite extraordinary in its own right, as I suppose you call it Art Deco architecture. And it develops this central image to the iconography of Isis and Osiris, which is the pillar of Osiris, in which he is imprisoned in the coffin after the conspiracy of Set to kill him and ship him downriver. And so on either side of the pillar of Osiris, from this beautiful page from one of the papyruses, is Nephthys and Isis, the sister brides of Osiris. And in the center is the Coptic cross as a symbol of that life which emerges from death, and the dynamic of the solar journey of the pharaoh and the soul, presided over by the two goddesses. There are other quite fascinating images where you literally see the two goddesses framing a central image of the pharaoh. And then what you might call a zoomorphic Necro-Gynetype. You can see how tedious and, this can become somewhat pretentious, but that's what academics need to do, in order to get tenure or promotion. I'm being sarcastic because I really love this stuff. I didn't ever do it for tenure or promotion. But those things come when you do something you love, right? And they're important. So the zoomorphic necrotype in this case are the wonderful monkeys, this particular kind of royal baboon that I remember seeing in the back seat of a Land Rover with Joseph Campbell sitting in the front. And really the only thing we saw that day was a tree full of those gorgeous, gorgeous animals. And they're all seated in this extraordinary posture of serenity, meditating Buddhas, every one of them. I mean, just beautiful image. And they are here associated with the dynamic of rebirth because, as I learned when we went to Kenya after Egypt, boy, the monkeys make a racket before dawn. I mean, they go scampering through the trees with this most wonderful cacophony, total pandemonium, just before dawn. So it's a rather remarkable way to wake up. This is a concluding image, actually, and it is from the very top of that pillar that you'll see here on your left is the central room with Gustav Klimt's abstract version of the pillar of Osiris as a symbol of death and rebirth. And it's got many of the basic geometrical configurations that we have been able to identify in association with the goddess traditions. And then this talk about squaring the circle or mandalas. This is extraordinary, with the squares, the triangles, the spirals on either side, as a sort of coda to the whole experience of being in a stucco palace. I think that means the end of the show.